So Vince McMahon has resigned from TKO and from the WWE after some shocking new allegations have came to light. For those of you that haven't been following this story, I'll just go ahead and warn you it's very graphic. And if you dive in and start reading about it, you're probably going to need a raincoat. When I got done reading about this one, I felt like I needed to take a shower. It's that bad. But basically what happened was Vince McMahon had signed a non-disclosure agreement with a former employee. He offered to pay her $3 million in exchange for her silence, to not talk about all the things that happened between them. And he paid her $1 million and then stopped paying her. And then her name got leaked. So when the payments stopped coming in and her name got leaked, she just came all out with her story, telling what happened between her and Vince McMahon. Now, these are her accusations, and Vince McMahon is denying them. He's saying there's no truth to it. Vince McMahon did release this statement. He said, "I stand by my prior statement that Mrs. Grant's lawsuit is replete with lies, obscene made-up instances that never occurred, and is a vindictive distortion of the truth. I intend to vigorously defend myself against these baseless accusations and look forward to clearing my name." And then TKO released this statement. They said, "I wanted to inform you that Vince McMahon has tendered his resignation from the positions at TKO as TKO Executive Chairman and on TKO Board of Directors. He will no longer have a role with TKO Group Holdings or the WWE." So there was McMahon's statement, there was TKO's, and then this was from the representatives of Mrs. Grant, who has brought these allegations against Vince McMahon. It says, "Miss Grant hopes that her lawsuit will prevent other women from being victimized. The organization is well aware of Mr. McMahon's history of depraved behavior, and it's time that they take responsibility for the misconduct of its leadership." Now, one of the reasons that I really wanted to tackle this story is because I grew up a hardcore, diehard wrestling fan. Have been my whole life. I grew up in the 80s, and I don't ever remember wrestling not being on the TV when I was growing up. Now, when I was a kid, I always thought the WWF, it was called back then, now it's WWE, but back then it was the WWF, and I always thought it was too cartoonish. I never liked that style. I always leaned more toward the NWA and Mid-Atlantic, Georgia Championship Wrestling, World Class Championship Wrestling with the Von Erichs. That was my jam. And Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, Ivan and Nikita Koloff, the Rock and Roll Express and Midnight Express, that was my jam, the Road Warriors. But later on, Vince McMahon, he bought up all those territories and put it all under one umbrella. And when that happened, we all just rolled with it and continued to watch his product. And then when you get on up into the 90s, he hit into what was called the Attitude Era, and they did a whole lot of adult-themed content, a lot of really edgy things, and characters like Stone Cold Steve Austin started coming out and pouring beer down his throat and giving middle fingers, and Degeneration X come out and started saying, "We got 2 words for you, suck it," and the women started all taking their clothes off, and Vince McMahon just fell right in there and embraced this new character called Mr. McMahon, which was a sick and depraved dude, a power-hungry control freak. And it makes you say to yourself, where's the lines between the character and the real person? Because when you really dive in and start reading the accusations as to what's there is accusations that he forced himself upon her and that him and a former employee both held her down and took turns. There's accusations of trying to pass her off to other wrestlers, wanting her to sleep with them. There's also accusations of him using dildos that he named after wrestlers. Also that he took a shit on her head during a threesome. I mean, it is some really sick and depraved stuff. And then you go back and you look at the sick and depraved angles that he took part in on wrestling. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's going to be hard for you to say you would never do something like that, because we've got mountains of those people are constantly sharing clip after clip after clip of the Mr. McMahon character saying and doing certain things. Now, I know what someone like a Vince McMahon would say. He would say, well, that's the character that I portray on TV, but it's not who I am in real life. But I've been a lifelong wrestling fan. There's one thing you got to understand about pro wrestling. For years, there's a word in wrestling known as kayfabe. It's wrestling terminology. What that means is you stay in character 24/7 and you never break kayfabe. So back in the day, if you was to ever bump into a pro wrestler, say at a gas station or an airport or something like that, you're out shopping, you see a pro wrestler. Back in those days, if you walked up to one of the bad guys and said, "Hey, can I have your autograph?" he would be a jerk just like he was on TV. He would remain in character. If you bumped into the Macho Man, he's going to be in full-blown Macho Man character even if he's out in public. And if you broke that, it was called breaking kayfabe. Because back then, they still tried to give you that little element of doubt. Everyone knew what wrestling was, but the wrestlers would never admit it. They would never say it out loud. They would go on talk shows and sit and talk completely in character. And then Vince McMahon comes out later in the 90s and he does away with all of that when he makes the argument that wrestling, pro wrestling, is sports entertainment and that it shouldn't have to abide by the same laws that other sports did. He was getting in a lot of trouble with a lot of athletic committees. They'd had the whole steroid scandal. His argument was, this is all entertainment. So he comes out, he tells everybody, hey, this is all entertainment. It's all a big made-up show. We're not really hitting each other. We're all playing a character. He goes ahead and exposes the business to save his ass. And there was a whole lot of pro wrestlers that hated him from then on for that because they had spent their lifetime dedicated to this type of craft, this type of art form where they stayed in character. Like Ivan Koloff was a Canadian dude who was playing a Russian. His nephew was a guy named Scott Simpson who was from North Carolina. He was playing a Russian. And they would walk around in character all the time. A lot of those guys never forgave McMahon for exposing the business, but he did so in order to save his ass. But then when you hear and see all the storylines that he did, you say to yourself, well, how far is the Mr. McMahon character away from the Vince McMahon behind the scenes? Because he actually did an angle one time where he did a tag team match and he was facing off against God. He had God walk to the ring and he got in the ring and had a fight with God. If you can imagine that. An invisible man, basically. And then there's the story that I saw surfacing where he actually wanted his daughter to do a storyline with him where he would be the father of her child. Now, that's not something that made it to TV. That's something he suggested. He suggested to his own daughter that he be the father of her child. And when she said, no, Dad, that's too sick and depraved. I could never do something like that even if we were acting. There's no way I could act and do that. Then he suggested, well, how about it be my son Shane? And she said, no, I can't even do that with my own brother. That's the kind of guy that would pitch that story. A guy that would pitch that story, and then you hear these stories, you say to yourself, well, it's believable. I mean, I'm not saying it's true because I don't know the Vince McMahon off the screen. But I do know every story that I've ever heard about Vince McMahon. He has always been a ruthless businessman, and he will tell you that he is. He said, I intend to vigorously defend my name. I will not quit fighting. And anyone that knows him knows that he won't. But here's the bottom line, as Stone Cold Steve Austin would say. Yes, I've been a wrestling fan my entire life. And yes, Vince McMahon is probably the greatest promoter in the history of wrestling. He is. The type of art form that they put out into the world entertained me my entire life. That being said, there's no way in hell that I would ever give him a pass for these things if they're true. Because I'm not in a cult and I'm not going to defend that kind of mentality. You know, I'm not going to rush in here and automatically, start saying that this woman is lying and things of that nature. I think it should all be heard out. And yeah, if it's not true, he should have his name cleared. But I'm never going to give someone like that a pass just because I found enjoyment in a brand of entertainment that they put out into the world. That's the difference between us and a whole lot of other people. I don't put people like Vince McMahon on a pedestal. I don't put people like that up there on a pedestal. I realize that, our heroes can turn out to be assholes sometimes. He was never a hero to me, but I'm just saying, there's some things in this world you can come back from. If he had just had an affair on his wife, yeah, you can come back from that. If it was discovered that you had a kid by somebody years ago and didn't realize it was yours, you can come back from that. Hell, if he was actually a serial killer, at the end of the day, people would sit and study his brain and go, man, that's not the guy I knew. But if this kind of stuff's true, that's just one of those things you never could walk away from because that's about as sick and depraved as it gets. I'll spare you guys the details. If you guys want to dive in and learn about the story, just wear a raincoat because it's pretty rough.